The rain hammered against the windows of the Golden Gate restaurant like angry fists, each drop creating rivers that streamed down the glass and distorted the neon lights of downtown San Francisco. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Kenji Nakamura sat alone at table 7, a corner booth that gave him a clear view of the entire restaurant. His black suit was perfectly pressed, his silver hair combed back with mathematical precision, and his hands remained folded on the white tablecloth as they had been for the past 2 hours. The untouched glass of water in front of him had long since lost its chill, and the menu lay exactly where the hostess had placed it when he first arrived. The other diners couldn't help but steal glances at the mysterious man. Some recognized him from the business news, Kenji Nakamura, the tech billionaire who had revolutionized artificial intelligence and owned half of Silicon Valley's most innovative companies. Others simply sensed his importance from the way he carried himself, the expensive watch on his wrist, and the subtle confidence that surrounded him like an invisible shield. But what puzzled everyone, from the busboy to the manager, was his behavior. Kenji hadn't ordered any food. He hadn't even opened the menu. When servers approached his table, he would simply nod politely and wave them away with a gentle gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and dismissal. His English was clearly fluent, they had heard him answer his phone twice with crisp, professional responses, yet he remained silent, watching, waiting. The restaurant staff whispered among themselves in the kitchen, theories flowing like the coffee from the industrial machines. Maybe he was waiting for someone important. Maybe he was conducting some kind of business surveillance. Maybe he was just eccentric, the way rich people often were. The head chef, Marcel, had even prepared a special appetizer platter, thinking perhaps the billionaire was too polite to order and was waiting for someone to make a suggestion. "He's been here since 6 o'clock, whispered Sarah, one of the senior waitresses, as she refilled salt shakers near the service station. "It's past 8 now, and he hasn't even sipped his water." "Maybe he's having some kind of crisis," suggested Tom, a young waiter who had only started working there a month ago. "Rich people have problems too, right?" Sarah shook her head, glancing toward the corner booth. "I've served a lot of wealthy customers over the years. They usually make their presence known. They order the most expensive items, ask for modifications, treat us like servants. This guy is different. It's like he's respectful. Almost too respectful." The manager, Mr. Williams, had approached Kenji's table 3 times throughout the evening. Each time, the billionaire had assured him in perfect English that everything was fine, that he was simply enjoying the atmosphere, and that he would order when he was ready. His tone was so polite, so genuinely appreciative, that Mr. Williams found it impossible to be annoyed by the occupied table. Meanwhile, at the other end of the restaurant, Destiny Johnson moved between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been serving customers for over 15 years. At 38, she had worked in restaurants since she was 22, supporting herself through nursing school during the day while waitressing at night. The Golden Gate restaurant had been her workplace for the past 5 years, and she knew every regular customer, every cook's preference, and every quirk of the ancient coffee machine that sometimes decided to spray steam in random directions. Destiny had noticed the man in the corner booth, of course. It was impossible not to notice someone who radiated such quiet intensity. But, unlike her colleagues, she wasn't particularly curious about his wealth or status. She had seen enough wealthy customers to know that money didn't automatically make someone interesting or important. What caught her attention was something else entirely, something in his posture, in the way his shoulders were held just a little too straight, in the way his eyes occasionally closed as if he was fighting against some internal battle. She recognized the signs because she had lived with them herself. During her nursing school years, Destiny had worked extensively with elderly patients, many of whom were Japanese immigrants who had come to America decades earlier. She had learned to read the subtle signs of displacement, of cultural isolation, of the unique kind of loneliness that came from being successful in a foreign land while losing touch with one's roots. It was written in small gestures, the way someone held their chopsticks when no one was looking, the slight hesitation before speaking English, the careful politeness that served as both a bridge and a barrier. The evening rush was winding down, and Destiny found herself with a rare moment of calm. She looked toward table 7 again and noticed something that her colleagues had missed. Kenji's hands, so carefully folded, occasionally trembled. It was barely perceptible, but Destiny's trained eye caught it. She had seen those same tremors in her nursing patients, sometimes from medication, sometimes from stress, sometimes from something deeper. "That man hasn't eaten anything," she mentioned to Sarah as they passed each other near the kitchen doors. "Tell me about it," Sarah replied, balancing 3 plates on her arm. "Mr. Williams is starting to worry we did something wrong. Maybe the guy's just weird." Destiny shook her head slowly. "I don't think he's weird. I think he's struggling with something." "What makes you say that?" "Look at his hands when you get a chance. Really look. And watch how he responds when people approach him. He's not being difficult or demanding. He's being careful. There's a difference." Sarah paused, studying Destiny's face. "You sound like you know something the rest of us don't." "Maybe I do," Destiny said quietly. "Maybe I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone is fighting a battle nobody else can see." The restaurant continued its evening rhythm around them, but Destiny found herself paying more attention to the lone figure in the corner booth. She noticed how Kenji's breathing seemed measured, controlled, as if he was consciously managing it. She saw how he occasionally pressed his fingertips against his temple, a gesture so brief that most people would miss it entirely. Most telling of all, she observed how he never looked directly at the other diners, but instead focused on points just beyond them, as if the act of making eye contact required energy he couldn't spare. As the night progressed and the restaurant began to empty, Kenji remained in his booth. The last of the dinner customers paid their bills and headed out into the storm, leaving only a few late-night coffee drinkers and the mysterious billionaire who still hadn't ordered so much as a breadbasket. Mr. Williams approached Destiny as she was wiping down tables near the kitchen. "I'm going to have to say something to him soon," he said, nodding toward table 7. "We close in an hour, and he's been here for 3 hours without ordering anything. I don't want to be rude, especially to someone like that, but..." "Someone like what?" Destiny asked, not looking up from her cleaning. "You know. Successful. Influential. The kind of person who could shut us down with a bad review or a phone call to his lawyer." Destiny straightened up and looked directly at her manager. "Mr. Williams, with all due respect, I don't think that man is thinking about lawsuits or bad reviews right now. I think he needs help." "Help? What kind of help?" "The kind that doesn't have anything to do with money." Mr. Williams looked confused, but before he could respond, Destiny had already started walking toward the corner booth. She moved slowly, deliberately, the way she had learned to approach patients who were in distress, calm, non-threatening, respectful of their space. As she got closer, she could see the details that confirmed her suspicions. Kenji's breathing was indeed controlled, but it was the kind of control that came from necessity, not choice. His hands, which had appeared steady from a distance, showed the subtle signs of someone managing anxiety or possibly something more serious. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the slight rigidity in his posture that suggested physical discomfort. When she was still several feet away from his table, Destiny stopped. She didn't want to startle him or invade his space uninvited. Instead, she waited until he looked up, making gentle eye contact before speaking. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "I'm Destiny, one of the servers here. I couldn't help but notice that you haven't ordered anything this evening. I was wondering if there's something specific I could help you with." Kenji looked at her for a long moment, and Destiny saw something flicker in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "I apologize for taking up your table for so long without ordering. I understand this is inconvenient for the restaurant." "That's not what I asked," Destiny said gently. "I asked if there was something I could help you with." There was another pause, longer this time. Kenji's carefully maintained composure seemed to waver just slightly, like a small crack appearing in otherwise perfect glass. "I am not certain you would understand," he said finally. Destiny pulled out the small notebook where she usually wrote down orders, but instead of preparing to write, she simply held it loosely in her hands. "Try me," she said. I've worked in restaurants for 15 years, and I've been a nurse for almost as long. I've heard a lot of things that people thought no one would understand. Kenji's eyes widened slightly. You are a nurse? I am. I work at UCSF Medical Center during the day and here in the evenings. It's how I put myself through nursing school, and I just kept both jobs because I love what I do. Something changed in Kenji's expression. The careful politeness remained, but underneath it, Destiny could see a glimmer of hope. In Japan, he said slowly, we have a phrase, Nana Karobi Yaoki. It means, fall 7 times, rise 8 times. It speaks to resilience, to the importance of continuing forward despite setbacks. That's beautiful, Destiny said. And wise. Yes, but what happens when you fall 7 times and discover that you have forgotten how to rise? What happens when the weight of expectation and success becomes so heavy that standing up requires more strength than you possess? Destiny felt her heart skip slightly. She had heard variations of this confession before, in hospital rooms and nursing homes, from people who carried burdens that their success had only made heavier. You don't have to carry everything alone, she said simply. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit that you need help. Kenji was quiet for a long moment, his hands now openly trembling on the white tablecloth. I have not eaten in 2 days, he whispered. Not because I am not hungry, but because the act of choosing, of deciding, has become impossible. I came here tonight because I thought perhaps if I sat somewhere warm and safe, the paralysis would pass. But it has only grown stronger. Destiny's nurse training kicked in immediately. Loss of appetite combined with decision paralysis could indicate several serious conditions, from severe depression to the early stages of certain neurological disorders. But her human instinct told her that this man needed compassion first and medical intervention second. Would you like me to choose something for you? She offered. Something simple and warm. Kenji looked up at her with an expression of profound gratitude. You would do that? Of course. It's what I do. She paused, then added, and maybe while you eat, you could tell me more about this weight you've been carrying. Sometimes talking to a stranger helps. Sometimes talking to someone who's seen a lot of different kinds of pain helps even more. Destiny returned from the kitchen carrying a tray with a bowl of miso soup, a small portion of grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, and a pot of green tea. She had chosen foods that would be gentle on an empty stomach but substantial enough to provide real nourishment. The kitchen staff had looked at her curiously when she'd made the specific requests, but Marcel, the head chef, had prepared everything without question. He had learned to trust Destiny's instincts about customers over the years. As she approached table 7, she noticed that Kenji had moved his hands to rest flat on the table, palms down. It was a grounding technique she recognized from her work with anxious patients. He was trying to center himself, to find stability in the midst of whatever internal storm he was weathering. I hope you don't mind that I took some liberties with the choices, Destiny said as she set the tray down. I picked foods that are easy on the stomach and remind me of some of the Japanese patients I've worked with over the years. Kenji looked at the carefully arranged meal and his eyes grew wide. This is very thoughtful. How did you know to choose these particular items? I spent 3 years working in the geriatric wing at UCSF, Destiny explained as she poured the green tea into a small cup. We had many Japanese American patients, especially from the older generation. I learned that certain foods brought them comfort, not just physically but emotionally. Food can be a bridge back to ourselves sometimes. She settled into the chair across from him, uninvited but somehow welcome. The restaurant was nearly empty now, and Mr. Williams had given her a discreet nod of approval from across the room. Kenji picked up the chopsticks that Destiny had thoughtfully included alongside the Western utensils. His hands were steadier now, she noticed, though still not entirely stable. He took a small sip of the miso soup and closed his eyes, an expression of profound relief crossing his features. My grandmother used to make soup like this when I was a child, he said softly. She would say that miso soup could cure anything, a cold, a broken heart, a troubled mind. Grandmothers usually know what they're talking about, Destiny replied with a gentle smile. Food is medicine in ways that go beyond nutrition. As Kenji continued to eat slowly and deliberately, Destiny waited. She had learned in her nursing work that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the spaces between words, in the comfortable silence that allowed people to gather their thoughts and find their courage. After several minutes, Kenji set down his chopsticks and looked directly at her. You asked about the weight I have been carrying. I'm not certain where to begin. Wherever feels right, Destiny said. There's no wrong place to start. Kenji was quiet for another moment, then began to speak in a voice so low that Destiny had to lean forward slightly to hear him. 2 months ago, I was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. The tremors you probably noticed, they are one of the symptoms. The doctors caught it very early, and, with treatment, they say I have many productive years ahead of me. But the diagnosis has changed everything. Destiny felt her heart sink. She had suspected a medical component to his distress, but hearing the confirmation still hit her like a physical blow. Parkinson's was a challenging diagnosis for anyone, but for someone whose identity was built around control and precision, it must feel devastating. I'm so sorry, she said simply. That must have been incredibly difficult news to receive. The medical aspects I can handle, Kenji continued. I have the best doctors, the best treatments, unlimited resources to fight this disease. But what I was not prepared for was how it would affect everything else. My board of directors has been discussing my succession plan as if I am already dead. My business partners have begun making decisions without consulting me. My own family treats me as if I am fragile, made of glass that might shatter at any moment. He paused to take another small bite of salmon, then continued. For 40 years, I have built my identity around being in control, being the person others turn to for solutions. I have prided myself on my mental sharpness, my ability to see patterns and make quick decisions. Now, there are days when I cannot decide what to wear in the morning, not because of the disease itself, but because the knowledge that my mind might betray me has made me doubt every thought I have. Destiny nodded, understanding more than Kenji probably realized. It sounds like you're grieving, she said gently. Not just for what you might lose in the future, but for the sense of certainty you had about yourself before the diagnosis. Yes, Kenji said, his voice filled with surprise. That is exactly what it feels like. I am mourning someone who is not dead, myself, before I knew I was vulnerable. That's one of the hardest kinds of grief to work through, Destiny said. When my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 5 years ago, she described feeling something similar. She said it was like watching herself disappear while she was still there to witness it. Kenji's chopsticks paused halfway to his mouth. Your mother has Alzheimer's. Had. She passed away last year. But, yes, we went through the diagnosis, the progression, the long goodbye. I understand something about watching a brilliant mind grapple with its own limitations. I am so sorry for your loss, Kenji said, and Destiny could hear the genuine sympathy in his voice. How did you help her through it? Destiny considered the question carefully. I think the most important thing I learned was that she was still herself, even as the disease progressed. Her personality, her values, her capacity for love and joy, those things remained intact much longer than we expected. The diagnosis felt like it changed everything immediately, but the actual changes happened much more gradually. She paused, then added, I also learned that fighting against the fear and uncertainty was exhausting for both of us. Accepting that some things were beyond our control, while focusing on what we could still influence, gave us both more peace. Kenji set down his chopsticks entirely now and gave Destiny his full attention. But how does one accept such a thing? How does one stop fighting? You don't stop fighting, Destiny said firmly. You just get more selective about what you fight against. You fight for quality of life, for meaningful relationships, for moments of joy and accomplishment. You stop fighting against reality and start fighting for what matters most within that reality. She could see Kenji processing this, turning the concept over in his mind like a puzzle piece he was trying to fit into place. My business, he said slowly, my companies, they have been my primary identity for so long. The thought of stepping back, of admitting that I might not be able to lead them forever, feels like admitting defeat. Or, Destiny suggested, it could be the most important leadership decision you've ever made. Ensuring that something you've built can survive and thrive without you isn't admitting weakness, it's the ultimate expression of good leadership. Kenji was quiet for a long time, slowly sipping his tea. Destiny watched him think, recognizing the look of someone wrestling with a fundamental shift in perspective. In Japan, he said eventually, there is a concept called a mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the impermanence of all things. It is considered a profound and beautiful recognition, but I have always resisted it. I have built my entire life around the illusion of permanence, of control that extends far into the future. Maybe that's what you're being called to learn now, Destiny said gently. How to find beauty and meaning in impermanence. How to lead from a place of humble strength rather than invulnerable control. You speak as if you have thought deeply about these things. I have, Destiny admitted. Working as a nurse, you see a lot of people facing their limitations, their mortality, their loss of control. The ones who adapt best are usually the ones who can find new ways to define strength and success. Kenji reached for his tea again, and Destiny noticed that his hands were steadier now than they had been all evening. Good nutrition was already having an effect, but she suspected that the act of sharing his burden was equally important. May I ask you something? Kenji said. Of course. Why did you approach me tonight? Other staff members were content to leave me alone, to treat me as a curiosity or a problem to be managed. What made you decide to engage? Destiny smiled. Honestly? You reminded me of some of my patients right before they make a breakthrough. There's a particular kind of stillness that happens when someone is gathering courage to face something difficult. I recognized it. And you felt compelled to help. I felt compelled to offer help, she corrected. There's a difference. You had to choose to accept it. Kenji nodded slowly. I see. And what happens now? I finish this excellent meal, return to my life, and hope that this conversation has somehow magically resolved my existential crisis. Destiny laughed, and was pleased to see a hint of humor in Kenji's eyes. Well, that would be nice, wouldn't it? But probably what happens is that you go home tonight feeling a little less alone with your struggle. Maybe tomorrow you make one small decision that feels manageable. Maybe you start thinking about what kind of legacy you want to build that doesn't depend on your ability to control every detail. Such as? I don't know. That's not for me to decide. But maybe instead of seeing this diagnosis as the end of your leadership, you start seeing it as an opportunity to lead in a different way. Maybe you become someone who shows others how to face uncertainty with grace. Maybe you use your resources and influence to support other people who are dealing with similar challenges. Kenji was quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, contemplative rather than distressed. There is a research foundation, he said slowly, that I have supported financially for several years. They focus on neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's. I have always written checks and attended their fundraising events, but I have never been personally involved in their work. And now? Now I think perhaps I could contribute more than money. I could contribute understanding, advocacy, the perspective of someone who lives with the reality they are trying to address. Destiny felt a warm sense of satisfaction. This was how healing began, not with dramatic revelations or instant transformations, but with small shifts in perspective that opened up new possibilities. That sounds like a beautiful way to transform challenge into purpose, she said. Kenji finished the last of his meal and sat back in his chair. For the first time since Destiny had approached his table, he looked genuinely relaxed. Thank you, he said. For the food, for the conversatio. 3 weeks later, Destiny was working her usual evening shift when she noticed a familiar figure approaching her section. Kenji Nakamura walked through the Golden Gate restaurant's entrance with a confidence she hadn't seen during their first encounter. The rigid posture was gone, replaced by something more natural, more at ease. He was still impeccably dressed, still carried himself with the bearing of a successful businessman, but there was something fundamentally different about his presence. "Good evening, Destiny," he said as she approached his table, the same corner booth he had occupied during that stormy night 3 weeks earlier. "I was hoping you might be working tonight." "Mr. Nakamura," she said with a warm smile. "It's good to see you again. You look well." "I feel better than I have in months," he replied, settling into his seat. "And, please, call me Kenji. I think we have moved beyond such formalities." Destiny poured water and set down a menu, though she suspected he might have more specific intentions for this visit. "I have to say, you seem like a different person than the man I met 3 weeks ago." "In many ways, I am," Kenji said. "Your advice about finding new ways to fight, about choosing what battles matter most, it has changed my approach to everything." He paused to take a sip of water, and Destiny noticed that his hands were steady now, the tremor barely perceptible. "I wanted to update you on what has happened since our conversation, if you have time to hear it." "I'd love to hear it," Destiny said, glancing around the restaurant. It was early in the evening shift, and her section was relatively quiet. "Let me just check with my other tables first." She made a quick round, ensuring her other customers were satisfied, then returned to Kenji's booth. As she settled into the seat across from him, she was struck again by the transformation in his demeanor. The man who had sat frozen with indecision 3 weeks ago now radiated purposeful energy. "I took your suggestion about the research foundation," Kenji began. "Instead of simply writing another check, I contacted Dr. Sarah Chen, their lead researcher, and asked if I could meet with her team. Not as a donor, but as someone personally affected by Parkinson's disease." "How did that go?" Destiny asked. "Better than I could have imagined," Kenji replied, his eyes lighting up. Dr. Chen later told me that she had been hoping for exactly this kind of connection, someone who could bridge the gap between the scientific research and the lived experience of the disease. We spent 3 hours discussing not just the medical aspects, but the emotional and social challenges that patients face. He leaned forward slightly, his voice gaining momentum as he continued. "What I discovered was that my business expertise could be invaluable to their work. They are brilliant scientists, but they struggle with things like project management, resource allocation, and strategic planning. I realized I could contribute my skills without having to hide my diagnosis." "That must have felt empowering," Destiny observed. "It did, but more than that, it felt honest. For the first time since my diagnosis, I was not pretending to be someone I wasn't. I was using my genuine experience, both my business skills and my patient perspective, to create something meaningful." Kenji paused to look around the restaurant, and Destiny followed his gaze. The dinner crowd was beginning to arrive, families and couples settling into their evening routines, unaware of the profound conversation taking place in the corner booth. "There is more," Kenji continued. "Dr. Chen introduced me to a support group for newly diagnosed Parkinson's patients. At first, I resisted the idea. I told myself I didn't need emotional support, that I could handle the psychological aspects of the disease on my own. But you changed your mind." I attended one meeting, intending to stay for just a few minutes to be polite. 4 hours later, I was still there, listening to stories that echoed my own fears and experiences. There was a retired teacher who was afraid she would never be able to write on a blackboard again. A construction worker worried about his family's financial security. A grandmother who feared she wouldn't be able to play with her grandchildren. Kenji's voice grew softer as he continued. "What struck me most was how each person was struggling not just with the disease itself, but with the isolation that came from feeling like no one could understand their specific situation. The teacher's colleagues meant well, but they had never faced losing the fine motor control needed for her profession. The construction workers' friends offered sympathy, but they couldn't relate to watching your hands shake when you tried to use tools. And you could relate to their isolation," Destiny said. "Exactly. Here I was, surrounded by the best medical care money could buy, supported by a successful company and financial security, and yet I had been drowning in loneliness because no one in my world understood what it felt like to question your own mind's reliability. Destiny nodded, remembering her mother's experience with Alzheimer's and the unique isolation that came with neurological diagnoses. What happened at the support group? I shared my story, Kenji said simply. I talked about the weight of expectations, about building an identity around control and precision, about the fear that admitting vulnerability would somehow diminish my effectiveness as a leader. And, do you know what happened? What? The other group members started sharing similar feelings, but from their own perspectives. The teacher talked about how her identity had been built around her ability to communicate clearly and inspire students. The construction worker described his pride in his craftsmanship and his fear that the disease would rob him of that skill. We all had different circumstances, but the core challenge was the same: learning to redefine ourselves in the face of uncertainty. Kenji paused to sip his water again, and Destiny waited patiently for him to continue. She was fascinated by the transformation she was witnessing, not just in his confidence but in his ability to articulate his experience with such clarity and insight. By the end of that first meeting, he continued, I realized that my business resources could help address some of the practical challenges these people were facing. The construction worker, for example, was considering early retirement because he couldn't afford the adaptive equipment that might allow him to continue working. The teacher was looking into leaving her profession because her school district couldn't provide the technology support she needed. So you decided to help them? I decided to create a systematic approach to helping them, Kenji corrected. Simply writing checks would have been the old me, throwing money at a problem from a distance. Instead, I worked with Dr. Chen and the support group to develop a comprehensive program. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folder, from which he extracted a printed document. We call it the Adaptive Independence Initiative. It provides not just financial support, but also occupational therapy, career counseling, and peer mentoring for people dealing with neurodegenerative diseases. Destiny looked at the document he handed her, a professional brochure describing the program's services and philosophy. The design was elegant but approachable, clearly the work of someone who understood both business presentation and human needs. This is incredible, she said, scanning the details. How quickly did you put this together? 3 weeks, Kenji replied with a slight smile. Apparently, when you combine urgent personal motivation with business experience and adequate resources, things can happen very quickly. We already have 12 participants and a waiting list of 30 more. That's amazing, but I'm curious, how has this affected your work with your companies? Kenji's expression grew thoughtful. That has been perhaps the most surprising development of all. I was so afraid that admitting my diagnosis would diminish my authority or effectiveness as a leader. Instead, the opposite has happened. He shifted in his seat, settling back as if preparing to share something particularly significant. I called a meeting with my board of directors and my senior leadership teams. I told them about my diagnosis, about my initial fears and struggles, and about the work I had begun with the Research Foundation and support group. How did they respond? At first, there was the expected concern about my health and my ability to continue in my role. But, as I described the program we were developing and the systematic approach I was taking to address both my personal challenges and the broader issues facing people with similar diagnoses, something shifted. Kenji paused, seeming to search for the right words to explain what had happened. My CFO, Jennifer Matthews, said something that surprised me. She told me that in 20 years of working with me, she had never seen me approach a challenge with such clarity and purpose. She said that watching me navigate my diagnosis with both vulnerability and strategic thinking had given her more confidence in my leadership, not less. That must have been validating to hear. It was transformative, Kenji said emphatically. I realized that my fear of appearing vulnerable had actually been limiting my effectiveness as a leader. By trying to maintain an image of invulnerability, I had been creating distance between myself and the people I worked with. They couldn't relate to someone who never struggled, never doubted, never faced challenges he couldn't immediately solve. He leaned forward again, his voice growing more animated. But when I shared my struggle and demonstrated how I was working through it systematically, they could connect with both my humanity and my problem-solving approach. Several of my executives shared challenges they had been facing, health issues, family crises, personal doubts, that they had never mentioned before because they thought it would be seen as weakness. Destiny felt her heart skip a beat at Kenji's words. She had learned over the years to be cautious when wealthy customers made unexpected offers. Sometimes they came with strings attached or expectations that weren't immediately clear. But, looking at Kenji's earnest expression, she sensed this was something different. "What kind of proposition?" she asked carefully. "The Adaptive Independence Initiative has grown faster than we anticipated," Kenji explained. "We already have participants with various neurological conditions, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, early-stage Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injuries. Each condition presents unique challenges, but they all share common threads around maintaining dignity, independence, and purpose in the face of progressive limitations." He paused to collect his thoughts before continuing. "What we discovered is that our participants need more than just financial support and medical resources. They need advocates who understand both the medical realities they face and the emotional journey of adapting to those realities. They need someone who can bridge the gap between clinical care and human experience." "And you think I could be that person?" "I think you already are that person," Kenji said firmly. "Your background as a nurse gives you credibility with medical professionals and a deep understanding of the clinical aspects of these conditions. But your ability to see beyond symptoms to the person experiencing them, that's something you can't learn in school. That's a gift." Destiny was quiet for a moment, processing what he was suggesting. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the opportunity to design your own job," Kenji replied. "We need someone to develop and oversee the patient advocacy component of our program. Someone who can work with individuals to help them navigate the healthcare system, access resources, and maintain their sense of agency in their treatment decisions." He reached into his folder again and pulled out another document. "I've had my human resources team research comparable positions and develop a compensation package that would allow you to leave both your nursing job and your restaurant work, if you chose to do so. But I want to be clear, this isn't charity, and it isn't a gesture of gratitude for one conversation. This is a business decision based on your demonstrated skills and our program's genuine needs." Destiny looked at the document he handed her, and her eyes widened as she saw the salary figure. It was more than she made from both her jobs combined, with benefits that included full health coverage, retirement contributions, and professional development opportunities. This is a very generous offer," she said, still processing the numbers on the page. "It's a fair offer for someone with your qualifications and experience," Kenji corrected. "But, more than the financial aspects, I think this could be an opportunity for you to apply your nursing skills in a way that creates systemic change rather than treating individual cases." Destiny set the document down and looked directly at him. "Can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course." "How much of this offer is about the work, and how much is about your gratitude for our conversation 3 weeks ago?" Kenji smiled, and Destiny saw both respect and amusement in his expression. "That's a fair question, and I appreciate your directness. My gratitude for our conversation is genuine. It was a turning point for me, and I won't pretend otherwise. But my offer is based on what I observed about your abilities that night and what I've learned about our program's needs since then. He leaned back in his chair, settling in as if preparing to make his case. "You recognized that I was struggling before anyone else did. You approached me with exactly the right balance of professionalism and compassion. You listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and offered perspective that helped me see my situation differently. Those are precisely the skills our participants need. But I don't have experience with program development or advocacy work outside of individual patient interactions," Destiny pointed out. "Which is why we would provide comprehensive training and support," Kenji replied. "Dr. Chen has connections with advocacy organizations across the country. We would send you to conferences, workshops, and training programs. You would have a team to work with, not carry the entire responsibility alone." Destiny found herself genuinely intrigued by the possibility. Her nursing work was fulfilling, but it was also physically demanding and emotionally draining. The restaurant job, while providing necessary additional income, left her with little time or energy for other pursuits. The opportunity to use her skills in a different way, to potentially impact more lives while having better work-life balance, was appealing. What would this look like day to day? She asked. Partly up to you, Kenji said. But I envision someone who works directly with participants to assess their individual needs, connects them with appropriate resources, and advocates for them in healthcare settings. You might accompany someone to doctor's appointments to help them ask the right questions, or work with an occupational therapist to ensure recommended equipment actually meets a person's lifestyle needs. He paused, then continued with growing enthusiasm. You might also work with families to help them understand how to be supportive without being overprotective, or connect people with similar conditions so they can learn from each other's experiences. The role would be part case manager, part counselor, part educator, part advocate, and part detective, Destiny added, thinking about the puzzle-solving aspects of nursing that she particularly enjoyed. Exactly. Every person's situation is unique, and figuring out the best combination of resources and support requires investigative skills as well as medical knowledge. Destiny was quiet for several minutes, her mind racing through the implications of such a major career change. The opportunity was exciting, but it also felt overwhelming. She had spent years building her nursing skills and reputation. Starting over in a new field, even one that utilized her background, would require courage and adaptability. Can I ask about the other people involved in the program? She said finally. What are they like? What would I be working with? The participants are remarkable people, Kenji said immediately. Take Maria Santos, for example. She's a 52-year-old artist who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 2 years ago. She was told she should consider giving up painting because of hand tremors, but she's developed new techniques using adaptive brushes and has created some of the most powerful artwork she's ever produced. His voice grew warm as he continued describing the program participants. Then, there's David Kim, a software engineer with early-onset Parkinson's. Instead of seeing his diagnosis as a career ending, he's been working with our technology team to develop voice-controlled programming interfaces. His innovations might revolutionize accessibility in the tech industry. They sound inspiring, Destiny said. They are, but they are also facing real challenges that go beyond their medical conditions. Maria struggles with insurance companies that don't want to cover her adaptive art supplies. David battles with workplace discrimination from colleagues who assume his diagnosis makes him less capable. These are the kinds of systemic issues that individual medical treatment can't address. Destiny nodded, understanding the broader picture Kenji was painting. And, you think I could help with those systemic issues? I think you could help people navigate those systems more effectively while we work on changing them, Kenji replied. Your nursing background gives you credibility with insurance companies and medical providers. Your communication skills would help participants articulate their needs more effectively. Your problem-solving abilities would help identify creative solutions when standard approaches don't work. What about the research foundation? How would this position fit with their work? Dr. Chen is very interested in having someone who can help bridge the gap between research and real-world application, Kenji explained. Sometimes research studies identify potential treatments or interventions, but there's no systematic way to get that information to the people who could benefit from it. You could help ensure that promising developments actually reach the patients who need them. Destiny realized she was becoming genuinely excited about the possibility. The work sounded challenging but meaningful, utilizing her existing skills while expanding into new areas. The financial security would allow her to focus entirely on one career instead of juggling 2 jobs. Most importantly, the opportunity to create systemic change rather than just treating individual cases aligned with goals she hadn't even realized she had. There's one more thing I need to tell you, Kenji said, his tone becoming more serious. This program is getting attention from other organizations and government agencies. If it proves successful, we may have opportunities to expand it nationally or even internationally. The person in this role could potentially shape policy and best practices for patient advocacy across the healthcare system. That sounds both exciting and terrifying, Destiny admitted. The best opportunities usually do, Kenji replied with a smile. But I've seen how you handle challenging situations. You approach them with careful preparation, genuine compassion, and practical problem-solving skills. Those qualities would serve you well in a larger arena. Destiny looked around the restaurant, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of her evening workplace. She thought about her nursing job, the patients she cared for, the routines she had built over years of dedicated work. Then, she imagined herself in a different setting, working with people like Maria and David, helping them navigate systems and access resources, potentially influencing policy that could affect thousands of people facing similar challenges. If I were to consider this, she said slowly, what would the timeline be? When would you need an answer, and when would the position start? I'd like an answer within 2 weeks, if that's reasonable, Kenji replied. The position could start as soon as you're ready, or we could work around whatever notice you need to give your current employers. We want to make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone involved. And, if I decided it wasn't the right fit after a few months, we would work together to find a solution that serves everyone's best interests, Kenji said. I'm not in the business of trapping people in positions that don't suit them. But, I'm confident that this work would suit you very well. Destiny took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. It was the kind of opportunity that could change the entire trajectory of her life, professionally, financially, and personally. But it was also a leap into the unknown, leaving behind the security and familiarity of work she understood well. This is a lot to process, she said finally. I understand completely, Kenji replied. Take all the time you need to think it through. Talk to people whose opinions you trust. Ask me any questions that come up. This is a big decision, and it should be made carefully. Can I ask you something else? Anything. What happens to our friendship, I suppose, if I take this job? Do we maintain the relationship we've built, or does it become strictly professional? Kenji considered the question thoughtfully. That's an important concern, and I'm glad you raised it. I value the connection we've developed, and I wouldn't want to lose that. But, you're right that working together would change the dynamic. He paused, then continued. I think the answer is that we would need to be intentional about maintaining both aspects, the professional relationship and the personal connection that started this entire journey. It would require clear boundaries and open communication, but I believe it's possible. Destiny nodded, appreciating his honest response. I think I need some time to consider everything. Of course. Would it help if you met some of the program participants and other team members before making your decision? I could arrange informal conversations with people whose judgment you might trust about the work environment and opportunities. That would be very helpful, Destiny said. 6 months later, Destiny stood in the conference room of the Nakamura Foundation's new headquarters, looking out at an assembled group of healthcare professionals, policymakers, and patient advocates from across the country. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the faces of people who had traveled from as far away as Maine and Texas to attend the first national conference on patient-centered advocacy. She wore a navy blue blazer over a simple white blouse, professional attire that still felt slightly foreign after years in scrubs and restaurant uniforms, but which she had grown comfortable with over the past months. In her hand, she held a presentation clicker, and, behind her, a large screen displayed the title of her keynote address, From Bedside to Boardroom, Integrating Clinical Experience with Systemic Advocacy. The decision to accept Kenji's offer had not been easy. Destiny had spent 2 weeks carefully considering every aspect of the opportunity, talking with her nursing supervisors, her family, and several of the program participants that Kenji had arranged for her to meet. Each conversation had added another layer of insight to her understanding of what the role might entail. The conversation that ultimately convinced her had been with Maria Santos, the artist with multiple sclerosis whom Kenji had mentioned during their dinner meeting. Maria had invited Destiny to her studio apartment, where adaptive easels and modified brushes were arranged alongside canvases depicting vibrant landscapes and abstract expressions of her experience with her condition. Before this program, Maria had explained as she showed Destiny her latest painting, I felt like I was fighting my diagnosis alone. My doctors were focused on managing symptoms, my family was focused on protecting me from stress, my friends didn't know how to relate to my experience. Everyone meant well, but no one was helping me figure out how to live fully with MS rather than despite it. She had gestured toward a canvas covered with bold strokes of purple and gold. This painting represents the first time I felt like someone understood that I didn't want to be cured or fixed or managed. I wanted to be empowered. The program gave me tools, resources, and, most importantly, someone who believed I could adapt and thrive rather than just survive. That conversation had crystallized for Destiny what this work could accomplish, not just helping individuals navigate systems, but fundamentally changing how society approached disability and chronic illness. Instead of focusing solely on limitations, the program emphasized capabilities, adaptations, and the unique perspectives that came from navigating the world differently. Now, 6 months into her new role, Destiny was preparing to share the lessons they had learned with a national audience. The Adaptive Independence Initiative had grown from 12 participants to over 200, with satellite programs launching in 4 other cities. The success had been remarkable, but, more importantly, the approach was proving to be replicable and scalable. Good morning, everyone, Destiny began, her voice carrying clearly across the packed conference room. 6 months ago, I was working as a nurse by day and a waitress by night, focused on helping one patient or one customer at a time. Today, I'm here to talk about how we can transform individual care into systemic change, and how the most profound advocacy often begins with simply listening to what people actually need rather than what we think they should want. She clicked to her first slide, which showed a photograph of the original support group that had inspired Kenji's program expansion. The story I want to tell you begins with a man who had lost his way and a conversation that changed both of our lives. But it's really about something much larger, how we can reimagine the relationship between healthcare providers, patients, and the systems that are supposed to serve them. As Destiny began to tell the story of her encounter with Kenji and the program's development, she saw heads nodding throughout the audience. These were people who understood the challenges she was describing, the gaps between clinical care and real-world living, the isolation that often accompanied chronic diagnoses, the need for advocacy that went beyond individual case management. What we discovered, she continued, is that effective patient advocacy requires 3 key elements that are rarely combined in traditional healthcare settings: clinical knowledge, practical problem-solving skills, and the ability to see patients as whole people rather than collections of symptoms. She clicked to a slide showing outcome data from their first 6 months. Our participants have seen significant improvements not just in their quality of life measures, but in their actual health outcomes. When people feel empowered to advocate for themselves and have support in navigating complex systems, they engage more effectively with their medical care. Dr. Sarah Chen, who was seated in the front row, raised her hand. Can you give us some specific examples of how this advocacy model differs from traditional patient services? Absolutely, Destiny replied. Let me tell you about David Kim, the software engineer I mentioned earlier. Traditional patient services helped him understand his Parkinson's diagnosis and connected him with appropriate medical treatment. But David's real challenge wasn't medical, it was workplace discrimination. His colleagues assumed his diagnosis made him less capable, and his company was reluctant to provide accommodations. She advanced to the next slide, which showed before and after workplace productivity metrics. Our advocacy approach involved working with David to document his actual job performance, connecting him with legal resources to understand his rights, and helping him develop a presentation for his employer that focused on his continued capabilities rather than his limitations. The result was not just better treatment for David, but a company-wide policy change that benefited all employees with disabilities. A woman in the third row raised her hand. This sounds wonderful, but how do you scale this kind of individualized attention? Most healthcare systems are already stretched too thin to provide basic services. That's the key question, Destiny acknowledged. And the answer is that we don't try to scale individualized attention, we scale the systems and tools that enable people to advocate for themselves more effectively. She clicked to a slide showing the program's training modules. We've developed a curriculum that trains healthcare providers, social workers, and community volunteers to use our advocacy model. We've also created resource guides and template letters that help people navigate common challenges like insurance appeals, workplace accommodations, and educational support requests. But, more importantly, she continued, we've learned that the most effective advocacy often happens peer-to-peer. People who have successfully navigated a particular challenge become mentors for others facing similar situations. Our role is to facilitate those connections and provide the infrastructure to support them. Kenji, who had been sitting quietly at a table near the back of the room, stood up. May I add something to that point? Of course, Destiny replied, smiling at him. When Destiny and I first discussed this program, I was focused on applying business principles to solve healthcare problems, Kenji said, addressing the room. What I learned is that the most important innovation wasn't in our systems or our resources, it was in fundamentally changing how we think about the relationship between providers and patients. He paused, and Destiny could see that he was speaking from deep personal experience. Traditional healthcare often positions patients as passive recipients of care. Our advocacy model positions them as active partners in their own treatment. That shift in perspective transforms everything. Compliance becomes collaboration, challenges become problem-solving opportunities, and patients become the experts on their own experience. A man near the front raised his hand. Mr. Nakamura, can you speak to the business case for this approach? How do you demonstrate return on investment for advocacy services? Kenji smiled. The financial benefits are substantial and measurable. Our participants have 30% fewer emergency room visits, 40% better medication compliance, and 60% fewer insurance claim denials compared to control groups. But the real return on investment is in human dignity and quality of life, metrics that are harder to quantify but infinitely more important. Destiny felt a surge of pride watching Kenji address the room. The transformation in him over the past months had been remarkable, not just in his confidence and health, but in his ability to communicate the deeper purpose behind their work. He had become one of the program's most effective advocates, speaking at medical conferences and policy meetings across the country. I'd like to return to the question about scaling, said a woman who identified herself as a director of social services from Chicago. What would it take to implement this model in a large urban hospital system? Destiny clicked to a slide showing their implementation framework. We've actually been piloting exactly that with UCSF Medical Center, where I used to work as a nurse. The key is starting small, identifying one unit or one patient population where you can demonstrate success, then expanding gradually. She advanced through several slides showing the pilot program's structure. We began with the oncology unit, training nurse case managers to incorporate advocacy principles into their patient interactions. The results were so positive that the hospital administration asked us to expand to cardiology and neurology. What kind of training is required? Asked another audience member. The initial training is 40 hours, spread over 8 weeks, Destiny replied. It covers communication techniques, resource navigation, legal basics, and systemic thinking. But the real learning happens through mentorship and ongoing support. We pair new advocates with experienced ones for their first 6 months. She paused, looking out at the engaged faces in the audience. What I want to emphasize is that this isn't about adding more work to already overburdened healthcare providers. It's about working more effectively. When patients are empowered to advocate for themselves, when they understand their rights and resources, when they feel heard and supported, that actually reduces the burden on providers while improving outcomes. Dr. Chen stood up from her front row seat. I'd like to address the research component of this work. We've been documenting everything, the interventions, the outcomes, the cost analyses, the scalability factors. This isn't just a feel-good program, it's an evidence-based approach that's showing consistent results across different populations and settings. She gestured toward a poster display along one wall of the room. We have 12 months of data now, including comparisons with traditional case management approaches. The advocacy model consistently outperforms standard care on every metric we're tracking: patient satisfaction, health outcomes, cost efficiency, and provider satisfaction. A man in a suit near the back raised his hand. I'm from the Department of Health and Human Services. We're very interested in what you've accomplished here. What would it take to pilot this approach in federally funded health centers? Destiny felt her heart race slightly. This was the kind of policy-level interest that could transform their program from a local innovation into a national standard of care. We'd be very interested in discussing that, she replied. We've developed implementation guides and training materials that could be adapted for different healthcare settings. Kenji added, we've also established partnerships with several universities that are incorporating advocacy training into their nursing and social work curricula. The goal is to create a pipeline of healthcare professionals who understand these principles from the beginning of their careers. The questions and discussions continued for another hour, with audience members sharing their own experiences and exploring how the advocacy model might work in their specific contexts. Destiny found herself energized by the engagement and the possibilities that were emerging from the conversation. As the formal presentation concluded and people began to gather for small group discussions, Kenji approached Destiny near the front of the room. You were magnificent up there, he said quietly. 6 months ago, could you have imagined yourself keynoting a national conference? 6 months ago, I could barely imagine leaving my restaurant job, Destiny replied with a laugh. This still feels surreal sometimes. It shouldn't feel surreal, Kenji said seriously. You've become exactly what I saw in you that night at the restaurant, someone who could bridge the gap between individual care and systemic change. You've proven that the most powerful advocacy comes from combining professional expertise with genuine human connection. Destiny looked out at the room full of people engaged in passionate discussions about patient advocacy, policy reform, and healthcare transformation. Many of them were expressing interest in implementing similar programs in their own communities or organizations. The impact was rippling outward in ways she never could have anticipated. Do you remember what you told me that night about fighting for what matters most within the reality you're given? She asked Kenji. I do. I think that's what we've done here. We've figured out how to fight for dignity and empowerment within the reality of our current healthcare system, while also working to change that system for the better. Kenji nodded. And we've learned that the most effective way to fight those battles is together, as a community of advocates rather than as isolated individuals trying to navigate complex systems alone. As the day progressed, Destiny found herself in conversations with healthcare administrators, policy researchers, advocacy organizations, and, most importantly, patients and family members who had heard about their work and wanted to learn more. Each conversation reinforced her conviction that they had identified something fundamental, a way of approaching healthcare that honored both clinical expertise and human dignity. By the end of the conference, they had commitments from 12 organizations to pilot the advocacy model, 3 universities to incorporate their training materials into their curricula, and 2 federal agencies to explore policy applications. But, beyond the institutional interest, Destiny was most moved by the individual stories, the nurse who wanted to advocate more effectively for her patients, the social worker who recognized the gap between services and real-world needs, the family member who had been struggling to navigate their loved one's care. That evening, as Destiny and Kenji sat in the same corner booth at the Golden Gate restaurant where their partnership had begun, they reflected on how far they had traveled from that stormy night 6 months earlier. Do you miss nursing? Kenji asked as they shared a plate of sushi and green tea. I miss the direct patient care sometimes, Destiny replied thoughtfully. But I realize now that I'm still doing nursing, just on a larger scale. Instead of caring for one patient at a time, I'm working to improve the system that cares for all patients. And, do you have any regrets about leaving your old life behind? Destiny considered the question carefully. No regrets, but I do have gratitude for the path that brought me here. Every difficult night shift, every challenging patient interaction, every time I had to juggle between my nursing job and restaurant work, all of that prepared me for this role in ways I couldn't have anticipated. She paused, then added, I think what I've learned is that sometimes the most meaningful changes in our lives come not from dramatic revelations, but from recognizing that the skills and experiences we already have can be applied in ways we never imagined. Kenji raised his teacup in a small toast. To unexpected conversations that change everything. And to learning that our greatest challenges can become our greatest contributions, Destiny replied, touching her cup to his. Outside the restaurant windows, the lights of San Francisco twinkled in the darkness, and, somewhere in the city, people were facing health challenges, navigating complex systems, and searching for advocates who would see them as whole human beings rather than just cases to be managed. Thanks to one conversation between a struggling billionaire and a compassionate waitress, many of them would find the support they needed, not just to survive their diagnoses, but to thrive despite them. The story had come full circle, but in the way of the best stories, it was really just the beginning of something much larger. The Adaptive Independence Initiative would continue to grow and evolve, touching thousands of lives and influencing policy at the highest levels. But its foundation would always rest on a simple truth that Destiny had known instinctively from her first encounter with Kenji, that healing begins when someone takes the time to truly see and hear another person's struggle, and responds with both competence and compassion. In the end, that was what advocacy meant, not just fighting systems or changing policies, but recognizing the fundamental dignity in every person's experience and working to ensure that dignity was honored in every interaction, every decision, and every system designed to serve human needs. Kenji reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. My personal number is on there. Call or text whenever you have questions or when you're ready to take next steps. There's no pressure and no timeline other than what we discussed. As he stood to leave, Kenji paused and looked directly at Destiny. Regardless of what you decide about the job, I want you to know that our conversation 3 weeks ago quite literally changed my life. You helped me find a path forward when I thought I was lost. That's not something I'll forget, whether we end up working together or not. Thank you for trusting me with your story, Destiny replied. And thank you for this opportunity, whether I take it or not. It means a great deal that you think I could do this work. After Kenji left, Destiny remained at the table for several minutes, staring at the business card and the job description documents. Around her, the restaurant continued its evening rhythm, servers taking orders, kitchen staff preparing meals, customers enjoying their dinners. It was a familiar world, one she understood and felt competent in. But somewhere beyond these walls was another world, one where she could use her skills to address larger problems, to create systemic change, to potentially influence the lives of thousands of people facing challenges she understood intimately. It was a world that frightened and excited her in equal measure. As she finally stood to return to her other tables, Destiny realized that regardless of what she decided about Kenji's offer, the conversation had already changed something fundamental about how she viewed her own capabilities and potential. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important transformations began with someone else believing in possibilities you hadn't yet imagined for yourself. You created a culture where vulnerability and strength could coexist, Destiny observed. Exactly. And the business results have been remarkable. We have launched 2 new initiatives in the past 3 weeks that address accessibility in technology design, projects that emerged directly from my work with the support group. My team is more engaged than they have been in years because they feel they can bring their whole selves to work, not just their professional facades. Destiny felt a warm surge of satisfaction hearing about these developments. The man sitting across from her was unrecognizable from the frozen, isolated figure she had encountered 3 weeks earlier. More importantly, he had not just overcome his personal crisis but had transformed it into something that benefited others. It sounds like you found your new way to fight, she said. I did, Kenji replied. But I also learned something else important. The fight isn't something I have to take on alone. Building this program, working with the research team, connecting with other patients, it has shown me that the most effective battles are fought by communities, not individuals. He looked directly at Destiny, his expression serious but grateful. Which brings me to why I wanted to see you tonight. I have a proposition for you, N, for treating me like a person rather than a problem or a celebrity. Thank you for trusting me with your story, Destiny replied. It takes courage to be vulnerable with a stranger. Perhaps, Kenji said with a small smile, we are not strangers anymore. For the first time since he had entered the restaurant, Kenji smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, but it was genuine. I would be honored, he said. Destiny nodded and headed toward the kitchen, her mind already working through both the immediate needs, something nutritious but easy to digest for someone who hadn't eaten in days, and the longer-term concerns about what she had just witnessed. As she walked, she caught Mr. Williams' eye and gave him a subtle thumbs up, the signal they had developed over the years to indicate that a situation was under control. Behind her, Kenji remained at table 7, but something had shifted. The rigid posture had relaxed just slightly, and, for the first time all evening, he reached for his water glass and took a small sip. It was a tiny gesture, but in that moment, it felt like the first step back toward the surface after a long time underwater. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the Golden Gate restaurant, something important had just begun.